Returning to the calendar under the order of Senate Bills third reading, on page 4 of the calendar appears Senate Bill 2761. Mr. Jackson, please read the bill.
Senate Bill 2761, a bill for not concerning revenue, third reading the Senate bill.
Mr. Jackson.
Senate Bill 2761 makes two changes concerning public-private venture leasings. Number one, it continues the special valuation procedures for the Great Lakes Naval Base in Chicago. And number two, it expands the application of the special valuation procedures to rental housing units to include Scott Air Force Base, and they're retroactive to 2006. I would entertain any questions, and I ask for an aye vote.
Gentleman moves for the passage of the bill. There being no debate, those in favor vote yes. Well, just for the record, Mr. Sullivan, I was into my comments before you hit your button, but I'll allow you to speak. Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Speaker, we just got on the floor, and this is a bill that is highly controversial, as everybody in this floor knows it is. And so for us to run this through so quickly before we get anybody, I was here trying to look around on the people that we know that are speaking on this. So it doesn't, I guess I understand what the last 2 days is all about, and that's what it is. And thank you for taking my time to speak.
That's it? Nothing on the bill? Mr. Evans.
Will the sponsor yield?
Gentleman yields.
I rise in support of this bill. This is of great local importance to our local school district. This is a housing situation on a military base identical to that at Great Lakes Naval Station. Although we have radically different tax treatment, it will be devastating to our local school districts. In the interest of fairness, I encourage all to vote aye on this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Rebelletti.
Thank you, Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Gentleman yields.
Representative, I'm not familiar with what a PPV lease is. Could you explain that?
A PPV lease is a public-private venture lease. This is something that was done in Senate Bill 702, where a public property, where public land is leased to a private person. And because of that, they've come up with this PPV lease where they can be taxed.
How does this benefit? I see the Muscuda schools are for it. How does that benefit them directly?
It benefits the Muscuda School District as well as St. Clair County taxing bodies, because now those taxing bodies can tax the leaseholder.
And I see, according to our analysis, as the Scott Air Force Base properties are opposed, does this take care of their opposition? Are they still opposed?
The property, the one you see that is opposed to it is the property owner of the business. It's not Scott Air Force Base.
And why is he opposed?
Because they're going to be paying taxes. But let me add, though they'll be paying taxes, but when they picked up the request for proposal to do the proposal, in the proposal it was stated that they should assume taxes will be paid, and their proposal should reflect the numbers.
What is the amount that the property taxes will be for those properties? Do you know?
I don't have that information.
Thank you, Representative.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the sponsor yield.
Sponsor yields.
Do you know how many students are impacted by this, Representative?
It would be all of the students in the Scott Air Force Base as well as that district itself.
Do you know how many?
I don't have the exact number.
Do you know what the impact fee is that the federal government gives Muscuda schools?
No.
Well, let me give you a couple numbers. There's 424 students that are impacted on Scott Air Force Base, and the impact fee that the federal government pays is $10,491,946, which is $24,208 per student. Is that true?
I think you're looking at the the individual students to stay on the property that were developed there, not all of the students of the Scott Air Force Base.
I think that's all the students.
Is that all?
The other question I have is, would these taxes be just strictly for schools?
Go right ahead. I'm here listening.
I say, would these taxes be strictly for the schools?
Then, with the taxes? Yes.
How about
The taxes themselves,
the property taxes?
no, it would not. It would be in those taxing bodies within St. Clair County.
Well, how about the property that you're talking about in concern, if I'm not mistaken, is on federal land, part of it, and part of it's private land, and they pay taxes on the private land. But what's on federal land, the police, the fire, the EMS, the water, and the sanitary sewer, all those services are provided by Scott Air Force Base and the military. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And we'd be paying additional taxes on those to the local
no, you
bodies?
will not be paying for additional taxes. Let me add now that, yes, they do pay an impact aid to the district as well, but that impact aid does not take in consideration capital development. Mascoutah has built a brand new school. That impact aid cannot be used for capital development.
Yeah, well, yeah, they also have more students now, more impact fee and less students than what they had previously. Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Schmitz.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to yield my time to Representative Sullivan.
Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe you're truly the wartime consigliere, and you missed me a little too quick. I did have something to say, but thank you. With the Speaker yield.
Sponsor yields.
Representative, we're here today because there was a ruling before the Illinois Department of Revenue, was there not?
Yes, there's been a ruling.
What was that ruling before the Department of Revenue?
That the company did not have to pay taxes.
Okay, so the company did not have to pay taxes for what reason?
They did not have to pay taxes because they were not a part. They were ruled that there was a license as opposed to a leaseholder.
Okay, so the Department of Revenue, our Department of Revenue, has already ruled that this is a license, therefore not subject to property taxation. Are there ever any other licenses similar to this on the Air Force Base that you're speaking of?
No.
There are actually two more. There's a credit union that has a license to operate on the Air Force Base that does not pay property taxes. There is also a commissary that operates on this Navy base that is also a license and does not pay property taxes. Do you know how many other states have this similar language throughout the country? Or how many other projects throughout the country?
I'm not for sure about the number around the country, but I know that we do have one at Great Lakes Naval Base.
Certainly. The Great Lakes Naval Base up near me, where they agreed going into the project that they would come up with a way to pay property taxes. Currently, there are 50 of these type of arrangements throughout the states. 37 are not taxed, 5 have pilot programs, and 3 are under litigation. So the overwhelming majority of these projects do not pay property taxes as it is. There is a management fee that takes place, so the payment that goes on. Can you explain that, or do you have an idea how that works?
The management fee, there's a lockbox. And in that lockbox, I think they're supposed to be placing dollars in there for maintenance of the facility, as well as other things determined by the lockbox. I'd have to go and read them to you.
So it's my understanding that 20% of the overall money that's generated by the project goes to the company for their license, so it's a management fee, and then 80% covers roads,
right?
all the other maintenance type things, upkeep of the buildings, renovation of new buildings. Is that correct?
I can't dispute what you're saying.
Okay. Well, thank you. To the bill. Ladies and gentlemen, here we go once again interjecting the General Assembly into a court case. The Department of Revenue has already ruled that this is a license, not subject to taxation, although the county has already decided they're going to tax it anyways. Our own Attorney General is going to have to sit and defend the Department of Revenue in a circuit court case that the county has already brought up. So Why do we want to do that once again? This is also going beyond taxation. They're taxing them at a certain level. This increases the property taxes. So by doing that, right now this company, their 20% management fee is being eaten up because they have to pay the property taxes. And you might not care about a company and their profit level, and that's fine. But by increasing the amount of property taxes under this new legislation, you now cut into that other 80%. And as we just heard, what does that other 80% do? It's for the airmen on the base. It's for their services that are provided under the dollars that are generated by this project. It's for the upkeep of the buildings that these airmen are staying in. It's for the building of new buildings to house more of our airmen. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hurt the airmen by taxing more of these properties, go ahead and vote for this bill. If you want to interject the General Assembly in another court case, go right ahead. But that's what this bill does. Please vote no.
Mr. Penny.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak to the bill. When this project was proposed, I was a member of the St. Clair County Zoning Board of Appeals, and we heard the testimony of this very issue. This issue is partly on the military base. It's partly on private property. Our board was given the task of considering the case of rezoning the agricultural property for a special use permit. When we heard this case, the applicants testified under oath before our committee. They testified that they needed the county rezoning to make this economically viable, to make it large enough in scale to work. I was a municipal official at the time, so I inquired at several different points whether or not this whole project would become tax-exempt property, taking our tax-accessible farm field and making it non-taxable. We were repeatedly assured by the applicants that this entire project would be taxable and included in the county's EAV. The board that I was on was a bipartisan board made up of Republicans and Democrats. All of us were very sensitive to this issue because this project affected our local school district, our local junior college district. Traffic patterns in the area would be increased. Also, in my area and Representative Jackson's area, stormwater drainage and flash flooding going into our local tributaries was also an issue. We would never have approved this project if we would have thought for a moment that it would be a few years later that we would be arguing for us to get our fair share of property taxes. The construction company and the management company knew going into this taxes would be due because they had agreed to that as part of the RFP. So any taxes abated by this body right now is going to go into the pocket of the management company. They were aware of this going in and they budgeted for it. I would like to thank Representative Paul Evans and also Representative Jackson for bringing this bill to us on behalf of the people of St. Clair County. And I would ask you to do the right thing, which is to make the developer uphold his original agreement and vote yes for this bill.
Majority Leader Curry.
Thank you, Speaker. Members of the House, I want to underscore a comment by the previous speaker. He tells us that in the request for proposals from the government to the developers of this project, there was language that made it absolutely clear that the winning bidder would expect to have to pay property taxes. It said so right in the request for proposal. We have another example of legislation like this in a situation very similar in the Great Lakes area, and the developer there has not fought the idea that property taxes would be due, and in fact this legislation is modeled on legislation we put into effect for that Great Lakes housing development. So for the developer in Representative Jackson's area suddenly to come forward and begin fighting the idea that they owe property taxes doesn't make any sense at all, and I think it's incumbent upon us to correct the record, to fix the problem, and to vote yes on Senate Bill 2761.
Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative, my only question is, when the original project was started, it was my understanding that the company decided or said that they would pay property tax on the 30% in the private, that was privately owned. And that it was the assumption, given assumption, that they wouldn't pay on the other 70%. Do you have a comment on that?
I couldn't speak clearly and say that you are incorrect, but I know that when they picked up the request for proposal, it stated that they were going to pay taxes on the project itself.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jackson to close.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Senate Bill 2761 is identical to Senate Bill 702, which started the Great Lakes Naval Base PPV. The only difference is that in this legislation, instead of being naval, I'm mentioning change it to military. Instead, and it also is making it permanent and making the fees retroactive to include the dollars that Hunts have already paid St. Clair County and Wascuda School District to the tune of $10 million. I ask for an aye vote.
Those in favor of the bill will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Please record yourselves. Cross, Tracy, please take the record on this question. There are 67 voting yes, 49 voting no, 2 voting present, and this bill, having received the constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed. On page 8 of the calendar, under the order of Senate Bill's second reading, appears Senate Bill 2443. Mr. Duncan, please read the bill.
Senate Bill 2443, a bill for not considering appropriations. This bill is read a second time on a previous day. Amendment number 1 was adopted in committee. Floor amendment number 2, offered by Speaker Madigan, has been approved for consideration.
Mr. Duncan on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate Bill 2443, I move that we adopt amendment number 2.
Those in favor of the adoption of the amendment will say yes. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
No further amendments have been approved for consideration and no motions are filed.
Third reading, please read the bill.
Senate Bill 2443, a bill for not considering appropriations. Third reading the Senate bill.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the Illinois House of Representatives Higher Ed Appropriations Committee met all throughout this session, and we had a very interesting and harmonious, sometimes debative discussion, and yet we came up with a budget that speaks to House Joint Resolution 69. It's a responsible budget, and I would ask my colleagues, all of my colleagues, for an aye vote.
Gentleman moves for the passage of the bill. The chair recognizes Mr. Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Mr. Duncan yields.
Mr. Duncan, I know the committee dealt with a lot of tough issues like most of the appropriation committees. Can you highlight some of the reductions in this bill?
Sure, there are a number of reductions. If you look at the analysis in the General Revenue Fund, we reduce the base operating grant for the Illinois Board of Higher Education. We reduce some of the equalization grants. The equalization grant was at $1.5 million. The base operating grant was $7.539 million in general revenue. We also reduced the City Colleges of Chicago grant by $921,000. We reduced the Illinois Veterans Grant by $6.511 million as well, to name a few.
The monetary assistance program was also reduced. I know we had a bill on this yesterday that dealt with communication with recipients, but can you highlight how much this was reduced?
We reduced the monetary award monies by roughly $15 million.
And that was a very tough call. I know in the debate on the committee that we understand we're making higher ed less cost effective, and that's one of our public agendas, is to try to make higher education more affordable for families. So this really is headed in the wrong direction. I hope that in some of the action we take and other proposals that have been put forward before this legislative body, that we can make some changes to improve the business climate in this state that would help increase economic activity, create jobs, and generate normal tax revenue that can be used for important things like higher education. I would ask for your support in this bill.
Mr. Rebelletti.
Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative, I'm looking at this performance-based measures, and I was wondering why the University of Illinois is at minus 6.03%, while the rest of the universities are at minus 6.14%.
Yeah. Representative, the Illinois Board of Higher Education came up with a formula, and every single university was impacted. The University of Illinois, as you know, has 3 major campuses, one in Chicago, one in Champaign, and here in Springfield. And so it was across the board reduction or performance-based review that we have been talking about, both on the House and the Senate, on the Republican and the House side, for the last 3 years. And we used the 2009 data to come up with a number, which is where we are right now.
Was there some type of transfer of funds regarding some geological surveys? Does that explain some of the difference?
It's in the bill as a distinct line item.
Thank you.
Mr. Tepetti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan, with respect to the Grow Your Own program, what is the status at this point?
The status is it's in the budget.
At what dollar amount?
At roughly $500,000.
What was the initial dollar amount?
Well, the previous dollar amounts were from $3 million to $2.5 million.
And was it necessary to cure it out, those extra dollars, or?
That's what the committee came up with and agreed on.
Do you know why, what the theory was?
Yeah, there were a number of reasons from both members on our side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle as relates to some of the return on investment outcomes.
What do you mean by that, return on investment and outcomes?
Well, since 2006, we gave them roughly over $19 million. And at the time of our discussion on this budget, there was roughly 50-some-odd graduates of college.
Okay. And where did you get that information from?
Received that from the organization.
Okay, so Grow Your Own actually gave you data that delineated how successful the program was, and as a result of your findings, you found it necessary because of the financial strengths that the state of Illinois is in, that it was appropriate for you to make the corresponding cuts. Is that correct?
Well, the Illinois Board of Higher Education gave us the data on most of everything that I'm talking about with some of the ancillary programs, such as this program. And we had members on our side of the aisle, Democrats, members on the Republican side of the aisle, who felt stronger than I did. I advocated for them last year, as I did this year as well. And every university, every agency, every program, special program or not, was impacted.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan to close.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is a bipartisan bill that we worked on since January. There was a very strong and active cooperative spirit. I have the utmost respect for my Republican counterpart, minority spokesperson Chapin Rose. I'd like to take my hat off to him with his cooperation, with us working together. We were very straightforward with one another as it relates to the reality of our fiscal conditions. We're not proud of cutting anyone, as us politicians love to try to be as supportive as we possibly can. So I would encourage all of my colleagues for an aye vote. And again, I'd like to thank my Republican colleagues as well as my Democratic colleagues, and particularly the staff person who really held my hand and many others, Mr. Mark Jarmer. Thank you, thank you, thank you, sir. And that's when I vote. Thank you.
Those in favor of the gentleman's bill will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Arroyo? Mr. Arroyo? please take the record. On this question, there are 63 voting yes and 55 voting no. This bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed. Chair recognizes Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of personal privilege.
Please proceed.
I want to take a moment to thank Chairman Duncan for the comments he just made and also return them in kind. Up until the last 24 hours, for events above everyone's level, the chairman worked very well, and I want to compliment him on that and the time he's put in, as well as Mr. Jarmer and Mr. Teets from our staff did a phenomenal job, so thank you.